Mr. Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense became the first nominee on Wednesday to get a yes vote from his committee, and it now heads to the full Senate. Democrats and Republicans are currently negotiating, Elaine, over how many of these cabinet members will be confirmed on Inauguration Day this Friday.
Well, Nancy, let's start with Congressman Tom Price's confirmation hearing. He's up for Health and Human Services Secretary. He told the committee that he's not interested in, quote unquote, pulling the rug out from anybody with regard to repealing Obamacare. But what is his plan to cover the millions of people who may be left without health insurance once the repeal goes through?
Well, there is no plan, Elaine, and that's why he found himself in a tricky position today, because he was making those assurances, and yet there is no plan, neither from the White House nor from Republicans on Capitol Hill. And those two sides seem to be a bit at odds right now over just how expansive the plan will be. The president-elect said this week that everybody is going to have insurance. Well, that is not something that Republicans on Capitol Hill have been promising. They've been saying that everyone will have access to insurance. So Mr. Price found himself trying to bridge that gap, and it was even more difficult for him because he himself has put forward plans in the past that Democrats brought up today that would leave a lot of people uninsured. And so it's very difficult in this vacuum for Republicans to reassure Democrats, reassure the public that everyone is going to be okay. The rug won't be pulled out from anyone when we really don't know what the plan is going to look like.
Well, as you know, Congressman Price was also grilled on some of his financial investments, basically said that he has no idea what stocks he held in the 90s or the 2000s or even now, because most of them are through mutual funds or pension accounts, which most people hold. Do you think, Nancy, that answer is going to be sufficient for his critics?
I don't, because there is one instance, Elaine, that Democrats returned to again and again today that had to do with a stock he purchased at a favorable price. And this purchase, he acknowledges he made himself. He did not go through a broker. It was for a biotech firm. He was invited to be part of a small pool of investors who got this favorable price. And so this is something that Democrats are going to keep hammering away at. However, I will say that all the Republicans on the committee came to his defense on this front. He said he was offended by the insinuation that somehow he was trying to get a special deal or profit off of his insider knowledge as a pretty powerful member of Congress. And so as long as Republicans stick together on his nomination, he really isn't in trouble. They've got the numbers they need.
Well, Nancy, let's turn to Scott Pruitt, who is up for EPA chief. He was grilled on the issue of climate change, which at one point led to a very fiery exchange with Senator Bernie Sanders. Let's take a listen to that.
Why is the climate changing?
Senator, in response to the CO2 issue, the EPA administrator is constrained by statutes.
I'm asking you a personal opinion.
My personal opinion is immaterial.
Really?
To the job of
you are going to be the head of the agency to protect the environment, and your personal feelings about whether climate change is caused by human activity and carbon emissions is immaterial?
All right, so Nancy, what is your take on that exchange?
Well, it's certainly not going to win him any fans among Democrats, who were pretty disappointed that he was willing to acknowledge that climate change is happening, but not willing to acknowledge that man is the primary culprit. But it leaves him in good stead with Republicans, many of whom, at least publicly, would argue that climate change is still unclear whether it's actually happening or not, let alone whether man is causing it. So he was really trying to bridge the divide between where Donald Trump is on this issue, where Republicans are on this issue, what he knows Democrats want to hear. It did not satisfy Democrats, who acknowledged that they were never going to get an EPA pick that was going to line up with their views. Any Republican pick for this job is going to be against regulations to an extent that a Democratic nominee would not be. But what really frustrates them is that they feel that actually his beliefs and his background put him squarely at odds with the EPA's central mission, which is to protect the environment.
Let me turn to Nikki Haley now, who's nominated to be the next U.S. ambassador to the UN. Actually had one of the least heated hearings today. Did she stray, though, at all, Nancy, from President-elect Trump on foreign policy issues?
She did in a couple of key areas, actually, Elaine, most notably NATO. You recall that Donald Trump has said repeatedly that he sees big problems with NATO. He said this week that NATO was obsolete, which led some of his staffers to try to kind of soften that over the course of the week and say, well, he just believes parts of NATO are obsolete. Well, today, Nikki Haley said that NATO is vital, and this actually has caused some confusion overseas. Some diplomats from around the world saying, we really don't understand what the incoming administration's position is when it comes to these key world organizations like NATO, and they say that it makes them very difficult to know what their relationship is going to be like with the U.S. going forward.
And Nancy, finally, Donald Trump is set to take office this Friday without most of his cabinet. Republicans are reportedly taking longer to fill out his team than for any administration since George H.W. Bush in 1989. So do we know what is taking so long, and is this likely to cause a problem for the incoming president?
It's a combination of things. First of all, there are so many millionaires and billionaires on his cabinet that it takes longer for the ethics officials who need to pour through their financial disclosure forms to identify potential conflicts of interest, to sign off on their plans to deal with those potential conflicts of interest so that they can be considered by the Senate. But it is possible that Mr. Trump will have at least 3 or 4 members of his cabinet, most likely the national security types, the Secretary of Defense, the CIA director, the Department of Homeland Security secretary, those folks sworn in on inauguration day, rather. And that is something that would make Republicans feel a lot better. Democrats are holding up the process a bit. They are playing hardball with Republicans because there are a few of these nominees that they really strenuously oppose. But at this point, it doesn't look like they can do anything to defeat those nominees. They can just delay the process.
All right, Nancy Cortez on Capitol Hill for us. Nancy, thank you.
You're welcome.